Rodgers had an okay day by his standards. The rest of the Packers also just okay, not that much better, but it was good enough to punch their ticket to the postseason. After the game, Rodgers had some interesting comments. Take a listen to this.
I don't know that we have the full respect of the entire league at this point, based on some of our performances, where we got beat by a couple scores and kind of the reaction, I would assume, to those situations. But we're 7-1 at home. We have an inside track at the 2 seed. Obviously, we have an opportunity to wrap up the division next week, which guarantees a home game and probably in the 3rd seed at worst. I like our chances. I like our football team.
Nick, you also had the Packers coming out of the NFC, I think, before we started the season. What do you think of what Aaron Rodgers had to say? We don't have the full respect of the league, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think that's a nobody believes in us comment from him. I think that's him reacting either to the fact that they were only 4-point favorites at home against Chicago, which I said last week was shocking to me, or just reacting to the fact that, and I think he's right, very often we judge the Packers by how great does Aaron Rodgers look. And Aaron Rodgers and that passing offense have not looked great. If you'd have told me they were going to be 10-3 at this point going in, or 11-3, pardon me, at this point, I would have said, okay, good, my Super Bowl pick's looking good, Candy's Super Bowl pick, but I would have thought it's because Aaron Rodgers is a top 3 MVP candidate. He has not been. And yesterday's game was another game similar to the game last week, I think it was against Washington, where Green Bay gets out to a lead, lets the other team kind of hang around. It's like, wait, all of it, they could drive and tie the game here, but they leave with a win. Very similar to week 1 against Chicago, by the way. Not a pretty game. They made one big play, but they left with a win. And so I agree with Aaron that right now they're maybe a little undervalued, but I also think if they're going to prove you and I correct, Aaron Rodgers has to play better than he's playing right now. Right now, he's not making the critical mistake. For them to beat the best teams in the league, he's got to be the guy that I still believe he can be.
Well, the reason we were so bullish on them at the start of the season was because of how their defense was playing.
Yep.
We saw it in that Bears game that, you had Zadarius Smith, you had Preston Smith. It looked like that defense was going to be able to create some plays and take some pressure off of Aaron Rodgers and give that offense time to figure out that new scheme under Matt LaFleur. Now, to the defense's credit, they were able to get some takeaways yesterday. I think that always helps. But when you have a 21-3 lead in your place against a team that clearly, to me, is inferior competition, you have to find a way to bury them, and I don't feel like they did that yesterday. I mean, if Jesper Horsted decides he's going to lateral it to Allen Robinson, we could be talking about a game that goes into overtime. But all in all, I think this Aaron Rodgers and this Packers offense is doing just enough to be able to win games. But at some point, they're going to have to click. They're going to have to figure it out because the way that they're playing, they're not playing good enough to be able to keep up with the other double-digit win teams in the NFC. There are 5 double-digit win teams in the NFC, so there's a lot of competition. Any one of those teams can beat another on any given Sunday, and so we're looking to see things that can separate you from the pack. We all know that that difference has to be Aaron Rodgers, and it's going to be up to Matt LaFleur to be creative in order to create some more explosive plays on that offense.
I think Aaron Rodgers is right. I think NFL players have egos. They like to, be seen and see their highlights out there and see people talking about them. We haven't spent much time talking about the Packers. They've been flying under the radar, and they do feel like when you look up going in the weekend, they have 10 wins, a chance for 11. It is a little bit surprising to some people. But on the same token, how many players can you name that are difference makers on this team that aren't named Aaron Rodgers? Are them? Devontae Adams has had a pretty nice streak. He's getting better as of late. He's really come on strong. On the defensive side of the ball, is there any I don't see a Khalil Mack. I don't see somebody on that defense that's just a wrecker out there that intimidates you. And you look at the ultimate kind of unbiased perspective of who's a judge of who's worthy. Las Vegas sportsbooks, most of them have about the 7th or 8th best odds to win the Super Bowl. So I think from that perspective, it's probably fair that they haven't got much of the conversation, but I still think they're a threat. But I don't take them more of a threat than the 49ers, than the Saints, than the Seahawks, than some of those other teams that I do. Maybe I'm guilty of not giving them enough credit, like Aaron Rodgers is talking about, but I still need to see a little bit more out of this team and a little bit more of some difference makers start to evolve on this team.
Aaron Rodgers isn't having his typical MVP-type season, and the team is 11-3. Aaron Rodgers isn't going out and lighting it up, and they're still right in the thick of it. I mean, doesn't that go towards what Matt LaFleur is doing with this team and what we wanted to see him do with this team, that it's not all about if Aaron Rodgers plays well, the team plays well?
Pardon me, absolutely. But he has to play better. They have put themselves in this position to get a bye, as you always talk about. They've only had 2 byes ever since Aaron Rodgers has been the starting quarterback. 2014 was the last year they didn't have to play in that first round of the playoffs, which is why I think Aaron Rodgers is so keenly and acutely aware of where they are in the playoff standings right now. But once they get there, they need Rodgers to be vintage Aaron Rodgers and the other things to happen. Because San Francisco showed you they can annihilate this team up front. New Orleans can play whatever type of game you want. And so what I think Rodgers is talking about since the Kansas City game was the last time Rodgers went over 250 yards passing. Since then, they've played 6 games. Now they're 5-1. He has 8 touchdowns and no picks. And he's averaging fewer than 200 yards passing per game. They need, in order to beat the best teams in football that you guys are talking about, they need all of what's going on right now to continue and that passing attack to get an injection. They're not going to get more talented receivers. So Rodgers, I think, knows it's on him.
Yeah, they might not get more talented at the receiver position, but I think Matt LaFleur can do his quarterback a solid and include more of what we saw yesterday. Devontae Adams not just playing the Z, but also playing the X and playing the slot, moving him around to give him opportunities to have one-on-ones, because we know what he's capable of doing in those situations. But again, this Packers offense has to get to the point where they can be more consistent in getting explosive plays down the field, because once we get to the playoffs, it's going to be hard to put together 8, 10, 12 play drives. You're going to have some guys that can be game breakers, and Aaron Rodgers being able to get them the football down the field. So I look for this offense to have to improve in that regard, but I have a little more confidence on that side of the ball just because they have one of the most talented quarterbacks that the game has ever seen. I'm more concerned about what's going on the defensive side of the ball, because it doesn't feel like they can stop a nosebleed, especially with that run game. They've got to get that cleaned up if they're going to have any chance. Also, that Packers offense, they've got to be better in situational football, especially on 3rd downs. You got to find a way to be able to sustain drives. So those are just some areas that they got to improve on if they plan on trying to make a run at this thing.
Here's where they are dangerous, is they haven't had to have Aaron Rodgers throw for 300 yards. That's a great spot to be in. And to your point, you know it's in there if he has to do it. Now, if you get in a shootout, it's tough to get in a shootout with the Saints because they have so much firepower.